The day started like any other at Pine Valley Stables. The golden autumn leaves crunched underfoot, the air smelled of hay and morning dew, and the horses moved gracefully in their paddocks. Among them was Spirit, the heart of the stable, a magnificent horse with a copper coat that shimmered in the sunlight. He wasn't just a horse. Spirit was family. Everyone adored him for his calm nature and the way he connected with people. Whether it was a nervous first-time rider or a veteran horseman, Spirit always seemed to understand. But that morning, something went horribly wrong. As the stable hand led Spirit toward the training arena, a sudden noise startled him. A bird burst from the bushes, flapping wildly. Spirit spooked, slipping on the wet path. Before anyone could react, he fell. The sound of his heavy body hitting the ground was deafening. Spirit struggled, his eyes wide with panic. But no matter how hard he tried, his back legs wouldn't move. The stable hand froze for a moment, then yelled for help. Within minutes, the entire stable gathered. Dr. Chen, their trusted vet for over a decade, arrived shortly after. She examined Spirit with careful hands, her expression growing darker with every passing second. "It's his spinal cord," she said quietly. "The swelling is bad. I can't tell if the damage is permanent, but this is serious." The once lively stable fell silent. Spirit, their shining star, now lay helpless on the ground. And so began a fight no one at Pine Valley would ever forget. The hours after Spirit's accident felt endless. Dr. Chen had worked quickly to stabilize him, guiding the stable hands as they carefully moved him to a padded stall. The usually cheerful barn was now eerily quiet. Even the other horses seemed to sense something was wrong, their soft knickers replaced by uneasy shuffling. Spirit lay still, his bright eyes darting between the familiar faces that surrounded him. His legs, once so strong and graceful, refused to move. Every now and then, he'd try to lift his head, only to let it fall back in exhaustion. The stable owners, an older couple named Dan and Susan, stood near Spirit's stall, whispering to each other. They had run Pine Valley Stables for years and seen their share of challenges. But this was different. Spirit wasn't just any horse. He was the soul of the place. Dr. Chen wiped her hands on her jeans, her voice steady but heavy. "The swelling is putting pressure on his spine. Horses aren't built to stay lying down like this. If he can't stand soon, we could lose him." Dan's jaw tightened. "There has to be something we can do. Anything." Dr. Chen hesitated. "I've called specialists, but the damage is severe. We'll know more in a few days, but..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Susan looked at Spirit, her eyes glistening. "He's a fighter," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "If any horse can pull through this, it's Spirit." But as the hours turned into days, hope started to fade. One by one, vets and specialists came to examine Spirit, and their conclusions were all the same. The spinal injury was too severe, the chances of recovery too slim. Still, Spirit didn't give up. He greeted each visitor with a gentle nicker and turned his head toward anyone who stopped by his stall, his eyes full of quiet determination. It was as if he knew they were trying to help. The stable workers took turns sitting with him, offering treats and comforting words. Riders brought carrots, apples, and peppermints, hoping to cheer him up. And yet the shadow of what might come hung over the stable like a storm cloud. Everyone loved Spirit, but they were starting to wonder, was love enough to save him? The stable had always been a place of life and laughter, but since Spirit's accident, it felt like the air had grown heavier. Conversations were hushed, and smiles were rare. Even the horses seemed quieter, their usual spirited whinnies replaced with somber nickers. Dr. Chen returned one crisp morning, her footsteps heavy as she approached Spirit's stall. She gave him a gentle pat on the neck, her expression unreadable. Spirit's ears twitched at her touch, his soft eyes meeting hers as though he were asking, "What now?" Dan and Susan joined her just outside the stall. Susan's hands clutched the edge of her sweater, and Dan stood rigid, his jaw clenched. They knew what was coming, even before Dr. Chen spoke. "We've done everything we can," she began, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. "The swelling hasn't gone down enough, and his muscles are beginning to waste away. Horses aren't built for this. If Spirit can't stand soon, his organs will start to shut down." Susan shook her head. tears welling up. But he's still fighting. Look at him. He's alert. He's eating. He's trying, Dr. Chen said gently. But his body can't hold out forever. If we don't see improvement in the next few days, she trailed off, giving them the space to process the unspoken truth. Dan's voice was low and strained. You're saying we might have to let him go? Dr. Chen nodded slowly, her professional demeanor cracking just enough to reveal the sorrow beneath. It might be the kindest thing. The words hung in the air like a lead weight. Susan turned towards Spirit, who lay quietly in his padded stall. He lifted his head slightly at her movement, nickering softly as if to say, I'm still here. Dan placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice breaking. We can't let him suffer, Sue. I know, she whispered, but it feels like giving up. That evening, the stable community gathered to say quiet goodbyes. Riders brought Spirit his favorite treats, crisp apples, fresh carrots, even a handful of peppermints. One by one, they stopped by his stall, some whispering words of encouragement, others simply standing in silence. Among them was a 6-year-old girl, her blonde pigtails swaying as she clutched a small notebook and a bag of carrots. She wasn't part of the usual riding group, just a curious visitor who had fallen in love with Spirit after meeting him during a family visit months earlier. She sat cross-legged outside his stall, watching him intently as he struggled to lift his head. You're not done yet, she whispered, her voice steady in the way only a child's could be. You just need some help. That's all. The stable owners barely noticed her. To them, she was just another visitor saying goodbye. But the little girl wasn't saying goodbye. She was making a plan. And in her notebook, the first rough sketches of that plan were already taking shape. The stable was unusually quiet the next morning. The golden rays of the sun filtered through the barn windows, illuminating Spirit's stall where he lay, still and calm. The air was thick with an unspoken grief as Dan and Susan prepared for what felt inevitable. But just as the weight of despair seemed too much to bear, a small voice broke the silence. Why can't we help Spirit stand up? Everyone turned to see the little girl standing by Spirit's stall, her notebook clutched tightly to her chest. Her wide, determined eyes darted between the adults, waiting for an answer. Dan knelt down, his tone soft and patient. It's not that simple, sweetie. Spirit's legs, they aren't working anymore. We've tried everything. But you help people stand up when they can't, right? She asked, looking up at her aunt, who had just walked in. The girl's aunt, a physical therapist at the local hospital, froze for a moment, caught off guard. Yes, but that's different, her aunt replied, though her voice wavered slightly. People use special equipment to help them walk again. Horses are, well, they're much bigger. The little girl tilted her head, as if the explanation didn't make sense. So why can't we make something like that for Spirit? The simplicity of the question hung in the air, as though she'd cracked open a door no one had thought to open. Her aunt frowned, the gears in her mind visibly turning. Well, maybe there's a way, she murmured, almost to herself. Wait, what are you saying? Susan asked, stepping forward. The aunt hesitated, then glanced at the notebook in the little girl's hands. What if we adapted the principles of physical therapy equipment for a horse? It wouldn't be easy, but... She trailed off, her mind racing now. The little girl opened her notebook, her face glowing with excitement. Look, she said, holding it out to her aunt. Inside were crude but surprisingly clear drawings. Spirit in a harness, his weight supported by bands, his legs brushing the ground. It's like a jacket that helps him float, she explained, pointing at one of the arrows she'd drawn. He just needs help remembering how to stand. Dan and Susan exchanged a glance, their skepticism slowly giving way to cautious curiosity. Dr. Chen, who had just arrived for her morning checkup, leaned over to study the drawings. The idea isn't impossible, she said thoughtfully. The challenge would be supporting his weight evenly. Horses are much more delicate than they seem. The little girl beamed. So we can do it? It's an interesting concept, Dr. Chen admitted, her professional tone giving way to a flicker of hope. But we'd need specialized equipment, something custom-made. The little girl's aunt pulled out her phone, scrolling through pictures of her therapy equipment. I know some engineers who might be able to help. If we can combine their expertise with veterinary knowledge. Susan placed a hand on Dan's arm, her eyes brimming with cautious optimism. "It's worth a shot," she whispered. By the end of the day, the stable was buzzing with activity. Calls were made to equipment manufacturers and veterinary specialists. Engineers were contacted to brainstorm designs. And all the while, the little girl moved between Spirit's stall and the office, her excitement contagious. As the sun set over Pine Valley Stables, the first sketches of the Spirit support system began to take shape. It was an ambitious idea, and no one knew if it would work. But for the first time in weeks, there was something they hadn't felt in a long time: hope. And as the little girl knelt by Spirit's stall that evening, patting his neck and whispering, "We're going to help you, I promise," Spirit nickered softly, as if he understood. The following morning brought a renewed energy to Pine Valley Stables. Engineers, veterinarians, and stable workers gathered in the office, huddled around sketches and blueprints. The little girl's crayon drawings still hung on the wall, serving as the heart of their mission and a reminder of where the idea had started. Dr. Chen was on the phone with a colleague from the veterinary hospital, explaining the design specifics. "We'll need something that can support over 1,000 pounds while distributing the weight evenly to avoid stress on his spine," she said, pacing as she spoke. Meanwhile, the girl's aunt had brought in resistance bands and other equipment from her therapy clinic to demonstrate the concept. "This is the principle," she said, stretching a band between her hands. "The system needs to provide support without restricting movement, allowing Spirit to rebuild his strength gradually." The stable owners, Dan and Susan, watched intently as the team worked, their cautious hope growing with each passing hour. "It's incredible how quickly this is coming together," Susan whispered, leaning toward Dan. "It's because of her," Dan replied, nodding toward the little girl, who was busy explaining her vision to one of the engineers. "She made everyone believe it was possible." By mid-afternoon, the first prototype of the Spirit support system was taking shape. The equipment consisted of a sturdy frame, padded harnesses to support Spirit's body, and adjustable bands that could be tightened or loosened depending on his progress. The engineers worked quickly, inspired by the urgency of Spirit's condition and the determination of everyone involved. Finally, the prototype was ready. A truck delivered the components to the stable, and the team carefully assembled the system near Spirit's stall. The little girl stood close by, her eyes wide with anticipation. "It looks just like my drawing," she exclaimed, bouncing on her toes. Dr. Chen stepped forward, her expression a mixture of excitement and caution. "Now comes the hard part, getting Spirit into the system safely." The stable workers carefully removed one wall of Spirit's stall to make room for the equipment. Every movement was deliberate, every step planned. Spirit watched with his bright, curious eyes, his ears flicking back and forth as he tried to make sense of the activity around him. "Easy, boy," one of the workers said softly as they began the process of positioning the harnesses under Spirit. It took 6 people, sliding boards, and a lot of patience to ensure Spirit wasn't hurt or frightened. Through it all, the little girl stayed nearby, her voice steady and encouraging. "You're doing so good, Spirit," she said, clutching the stall's edge. "Just a little more, and you'll be standing again." Finally, after what felt like hours, everything was in place. Spirit lay calmly, his body supported by the harnesses. Dr. Chen stepped back, wiping her brow. "All right," she said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "Let's take this slow." The team began to tighten the support bands, lifting Spirit's weight gradually. The little girl held her breath, her small hands gripping the edge of the stall. The stable was silent except for the soft creaking of the equipment and the rustling of Spirit's bedding. At first, nothing happened. Spirit remained still, his muscles trembling slightly under the unfamiliar pressure. But then, with a soft nicker, he shifted his weight. His front legs pushed against the ground, and his back legs twitched, trying to respond. "He's trying!" the little girl shouted, her voice breaking the silence. Slowly, Spirit's body began to lift. It wasn't perfect. His back legs couldn't fully support him yet, and the harnesses carried most of his weight. But for the first time since his accident, Spirit was almost standing. Tears filled Susan's eyes as she turned to Dan. "He's fighting," she whispered. Dr. Chen checked Spirit's vitals, her smile breaking through her professional demeanor. "This is incredible," she said. He's responding to the support. His muscles are weak, but they're working. The little girl clapped her hands, her joy spilling over. I knew you could do it, Spirit, she cheered. After a few moments, the team gently lowered Spirit back down, giving him time to rest. But the mood in the stable had shifted. What had once been despair was now cautious optimism. Spirit had taken his first step toward recovery, and everyone could feel it. This was just the beginning. The following days at Pine Valley Stables were filled with a kind of energy that had been absent for weeks. The success of the first attempt with the Spirit support system had rekindled hope among everyone involved. Engineers returned to refine the prototype, while Dr. Chen and her team closely monitored Spirit's progress. The little girl was there every day, her presence a constant source of encouragement. She spent hours near Spirit's stall, reading him stories or simply talking to him. You'll stand for even longer today, Spirit, she said one morning, her small hands holding onto the edge of the stall. You're so brave. Dr. Chen arrived with a clipboard, her professional focus masking the excitement in her voice. Let's see what he can do today, she said to the team gathered around. The stable hands carefully adjusted the harnesses, ensuring Spirit was comfortable. As the support bands were tightened, Spirit lifted his head, his ears flicking forward with anticipation. The little girl leaned forward, her eyes wide with hope. You can do it, she whispered. This time Spirit didn't hesitate. As the bands took some of his weight, he pushed with his front legs. His back legs trembled but began to engage, pressing against the ground with more strength than before. He's doing it, one of the stable workers exclaimed, his voice filled with awe. Spirit managed to stand almost fully upright, his legs quivering under the effort, but holding steady. The entire stable seemed to hold its breath as he remained standing for a full minute, before gradually being lowered back down. Dr. Chen quickly checked his vitals, her smile evident. His muscles are responding even faster than I expected, she said. He's regaining strength, and his determination is remarkable. The little girl clapped her hands, a bright grin lighting up her face. I told you, Spirit. You're amazing. The news of Spirit's progress spread quickly. Local veterinarians came to observe the system in action, amazed at the innovative approach. The equipment company worked with the stable to refine the design, incorporating feedback from the team. More importantly, Spirit's progress began to lift the spirits of everyone at the stable. Riders who had avoided the barn since the accident returned to visit him, offering him treats and words of encouragement. The once somber atmosphere was replaced with cautious optimism and renewed energy. Spirit, too, seemed to sense the change. He began to nicker softly whenever the little girl approached, his bright eyes following her every movement. She became his biggest cheerleader, reminding everyone why they had fought so hard to save him. One afternoon, as Spirit stood in the support system for another session, the little girl sat nearby, drawing pictures of him. She sketched him running through the fields, his copper coat gleaming in the sunlight. You'll get there, she said softly, holding up her drawing for him to see. I know you will. Spirit responded with a soft nicker, his ears flicking toward her. It was as if he understood her words, drawing strength from her unwavering belief. Dr. Chen stood nearby, watching the interaction with a smile. She's right, she said to Dan and Susan. Spirit is proving that even when the odds seem impossible, hope and determination can lead to extraordinary things. As the sun set over the stable that evening, casting a warm golden light through the barn, Spirit rested in his stall, surrounded by the love and support of everyone who believed in him. The little girl stayed by his side, whispering stories and dreams of the day he would run free again. The days at Pine Valley Stables continued to brim with cautious optimism. Each session with the Spirit support system brought visible progress. Spirit's back legs grew stronger, his movements more deliberate. The once quiet barn now buzzed with excitement as the staff, volunteers, and visitors gathered to watch his rehabilitation sessions. The little girl was always there, her unwavering presence a beacon of hope. On a bright autumn morning, she arrived earlier than usual, her face glowing with anticipation. Today's the day, Spirit, she said softly, slipping him a peppermint. I just know it. Dr. Chen and the stable owners prepared for another session. The engineers had fine-tuned the support system, making it easier for Spirit to shift his weight naturally. The equipment sparkled under the morning sunlight streaming through the barn windows. As the session began, Spirit moved into position, his ears alert. The little girl stood nearby, her small hands gripping the wooden stall door. "You've got this," she said encouragingly. The team slowly adjusted the support bands, carefully lifting some of Spirit's weight. He pushed forward with his front legs, his muscles flexing with effort. Then, for the first time, his back legs pressed firmly against the ground. "He's trying harder today," Dr. Chen said, her voice edged with excitement. Spirit lifted himself higher than he ever had before. His back legs trembled but held steady. A collective gasp filled the barn as Spirit took a small, tentative step forward. "He's walking!" one of the stable hands shouted. The little girl jumped up and down, clapping her hands. "You're doing it, Spirit! You're walking!" Spirit paused, his ears flicking toward her voice, then took another small step. The support system bore most of his weight, but his legs were moving, truly moving. Dr. Chen was quick to check his vitals, her expression glowing. "His muscle coordination is improving, and the nerve signals are getting through. This is incredible." Dan and Susan stood nearby, tears streaming down their faces. "We never thought this would be possible," Susan said, her voice breaking. The little girl ran to Spirit's side as soon as the session ended. She wrapped her arms around his neck, her voice filled with pride. "You're the bravest horse in the world, Spirit." Over the next few days, news of Spirit's progress spread far and wide. Other veterinarians began visiting Pine Valley stables to observe the system in action. Dr. Chen fielded calls from stables across the country, all eager to learn how the Spirit support system could help their injured horses. But for the little girl, Spirit's progress meant something much more personal. She spent her evenings drawing new pictures of him, this time galloping through the fields, free and strong. She told him about all the adventures they would have together once he fully recovered. One crisp afternoon, as Spirit rested in his stall after another successful session, the little girl sat beside him, her small hand resting gently on his neck. "You're my hero," she whispered, "and I know you're going to help so many other horses too." Spirit nickered softly, his eyes full of trust. In that moment, it was clear to everyone who saw them that the bond between the little girl and Spirit was something truly extraordinary. A full year had passed since Spirit's accident, a year of challenges, hope, and remarkable progress. Pine Valley Stables had transformed from a quiet riding center into a beacon of innovation and compassion. Spirit, once a horse everyone thought would never stand again, was now the heart of the stable's new purpose. It was a crisp autumn morning, much like the one when Spirit's life had changed forever. The stables were bustling with excitement. Today was a celebration, a tribute to Spirit's journey and the groundbreaking impact of the Spirit support system. The barn was decorated with photos of Spirit's progress, letters from people whose horses had been saved, and, at the center of it all, a framed crayon drawing, the little girl's original sketch of Spirit standing tall. Families gathered, their children clutching carrots and apples for Spirit. Among them was the little girl, now 7 years old, her smile brighter than ever. She stood proudly by Spirit's side, gently stroking his copper coat as he nuzzled her hand. As the event began, Dan stepped forward to speak, his voice filled with emotion. "A year ago, we were preparing to say goodbye to Spirit. Today, because of the determination of a little girl, he's not just walking, he's inspiring others to believe in what's possible." Applause erupted as Dr. Chen shared the incredible results of the Spirit support system. "We've seen this system change lives, not just for Spirit, but for countless other horses across the country. It's opened doors we never thought possible in veterinary medicine." But the highlight of the event came when the little girl was asked to say a few words. She stood beside Spirit, her hand resting on his neck. "I didn't do anything special," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Spirit just needed someone to believe in him, and now he's helping everyone believe in miracles." As the crowd cheered, Spirit stepped forward, without the support system for the first time in front of so many people. His steps were slow but steady, his ears pricked forward, and his eyes bright. The crowd gasped in awe, then broke into applause. Tears streamed down the little girl's face as she walked beside him, matching his pace. "You did it, Spirit," she whispered. "You're incredible." That evening, as the celebration wound down and the stable grew quiet, the little girl visited Spirit's stall one last time for the day. She leaned against him, her small hand resting on his mane. You've helped so many people, Spirit, she said softly, and you'll keep helping them, won't you? Spirit nickered in response, his gentle eyes filled with trust. Above them, the framed crayon drawing of Spirit standing tall seemed to glow in the soft light of the barn. It was a reminder of where it all began. A simple idea born from the pure, unshakable belief of a child who refused to give up hope. As the stable lights dimmed and the stars filled the sky, Spirit stood contentedly in his stall, fully healed and with a new purpose. And somewhere in the little girl's room, new crayon drawings were taking shape. Drawings of Spirit running free, inspiring hope and changing lives. Because sometimes all it takes is one small voice to spark a miracle.